So today's training is Parenting Traumatized Infants and Toddlers, the Myths versus Facts for 0 to 5. We are very excited to have this presenter with us today. His name is Michael Gomez, Dr. Michael Gomez, and we're very excited to give you a brief intro because he's got the good info today. So we want to make sure to get to it. Dr. Gomez is a psychologist, previously a director of the Adversity and Resilience Community Center in West Texas, member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network Steering Committee, specializing in trauma-focused CBT, treatment of adolescents with problematic sexual behaviors, PCIT target assessments on autism spectrum disorder. So we are so incredibly grateful and excited to have you with us, Dr. Gomez. We know it's going to be an information-packed session. Highly encourage participants, again, to answer or to ask any questions in that Q&A box, and we're excited to get started. So I will stop sharing my screen, and you can take it away from there.
All right. Thank you, Jess, so much. I've decided now that Jess will introduce me to everything I do because it makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. Then I'm like, oh crap, it's me. I got to actually talk now. So thank you everyone for coming on to this training. I really appreciate it. I know you could have other commitments, so thank you for doing this. So I'm going to kind of jump right into it. We're going to be talking about that 0 to 5 age range. This age range is, in full disclosure, I kind of stayed away from it for kind of a long time because I was told, and I also still feel like I work well with teens, but one of my mentors said, you got to get you a little stronger in here, because I was kind of scared of the little people. If you have a young kid, I will not hold that child until they're 2 years old because I'm afraid I'm going to drop them. This is the most valuable thing I own, and I drop this all the time. And so, like, you created a miracle, and I'm going to mess it up in like 10 seconds. So I had to spend a lot of energy doing this, and my mentors, especially Oklahoma, helped me a lot with that. So right now, I'm currently actually on the other side of the U.S. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, at Brown University. Sorry, I am Brown and at a university, but that's not it's the actual place. Work with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and do a lot of work with trauma. So what we're going to do today are the following things. Also, look, koalas are always ready to smile. And are they little cute little guys? We're about to talk about trauma and little kids. So we're talking about awful, awful things. So I just wanted to show you a koala, right? Look at the little guy. It looks like they exist on a diet of peanut butter and hugs, don't they? Okay. So we're going to learn some of the impacts and how some of our kind of traditional, the diagnoses you hear like PTSD are kind of not the greatest fit for our itty bitties. I hear the word trauma-informed all the time, and it's kind of lost its meaning at this point, kind of like if you say synergy, like, you know, Joy, do you got synergy? You have some synergy, Anita, like, you know, and it kind of is lost all meaning. And then I want to leave you with some actual tools that either you as a provider, you as a parent, you as a support staff, you as a teacher, you as a social worker, you as a, whatever your role is, that you can actually use and take away with you when this talk is done. So first kind of basic information is all of this stuff is probably, if you need like handouts, you can go to American Academy of Pediatrics. Like if you like, when is normal walking, talking, speech, when are these kind of normal developments? They have it literally in a table format. You can, if you can just Google it, you don't need to memorize it. You're not a grad student anymore. You can do this. But when I teach parents, especially, and teachers, I kind of go through this heuristic. With very young children, we call this egocentric. Concrete is the next one. And then where a lot of people kind of make a misstep is that they kind of talk to little kids in this last one, this abstract. And so I'm going to go through these in kind of plain English, okay? So the first one is egocentric. That's the age we're talking about. Your itty bitties, your toddlers, like, you know, kind of like usually like first, second grade at most. So like that's kind of the top range, but some kids, it depends. You have a kid with FAS or intellectual disability, that this stage might last into their late elementary, maybe even junior high. And the definition of egocentric is A plus B equals me. That's a lot of toddlers and young children, and also many 40-year-old men, but that's not the point. Okay. And the whole definition of this is any event that happens is caused by the kid in some way. They have a causal agency, and not just in trauma or stressful events, but anything. So my go-to example is when I was living in Oklahoma, we had a massive hailstorm. my friend had a 4-year-old son, and they were in the living room where there's a lot of glass windows. So he brought him to the kitchen where there's much, much less glass. And it was outside of the kind of range of the store, like where the storm was coming in. And so what he ended up doing is he just put him in there, and his son, he wasn't looking. His son ran to, like, looked like he was about to run in the living room, and he was like about to freak out. And what his son did is he stopped right at the entryway to the living room and yelled, "Stop it, God!" Because he is a causal factor, and he can control the weather because he prays to God every night. He does his prayers before he goes to bed. So he's like, yeah, I talk to God like every night. Me and him got, me and the big guy got a direct line. And so that's how the kind of world works. They have complete causality, like, or not complete, but they have some type of causality. So you cannot argue with a 4-year-old. Hopefully, you don't need a PhD to tell you that. But neurologically, it's just their analytic skills aren't cooked yet. It's right here, and this is still cooking. So the solution for a kid this age, like all of the stuff we do, is surrounded around being present, being comforting, like basic attachment theory. We're going to go into something called pride skills a little later, but the skills we have to do this are based around this idea of being physically present and comforting. And so we want to comfort them, we want to soothe them, not necessarily like we got to convince them of something. Now you have some kind of brighter, like 4 or 5-year-olds that might get to this stage, and this is concrete: A plus B equals C. So this is the kid who mom and dad are fighting because of my potty accident, not because they are domestically violent to each other, because that's the thing that they heard. So this is a phrase we have: is correlation is causation, right? Correlation is not causation, like it's just correlation, but this is how they see the world, anything correlated. So I'm going to go off screen for a second just so we can do this activity. I want everybody who's on the webinar right now, I want you to look in your physical environment. Just look around real quick, okay? Just do a glance around your environment. Okay, you got it? Cool. If you cannot see it, for someone who's in concrete stage, it's not causal in the universe. Okay, so it goes from me, egocentric, to whatever I can see concrete. So the example I give is like a 5th grader who says, "Miss Wallace, Rebecca is laughing at me." It's like, Michael, no, like Rebecca, like Dana told Rebecca a joke. And it's like, well, what they don't know is, 5th grade Michael, lives in a domestically violent household. So I saw Rebecca laughing, but so that was something that I still have that physiological distress from seeing my mom and dad fighting. And so that's what I'm seeing, but that's what I can see is I can see Rebecca. I can see her laughing. So that becomes a causal factor. So going back to the slides. So you have to be really concrete with these kids to solve it. So I think where a lot of parents, especially if they're like a bright 5-year-old who's in this stage, or bright 4-year-old, they think they need to tell them something else. And what I keep saying is you don't have to necessarily do anything different. You just have to keep doing more of what you're doing. So repetition is a big factor. So if, especially parents usually figure this out with their kid. It's like, okay, Michael, what did I just say? I don't know. Okay, I said, take off your shoes and then come to dinner. Okay, what did I say? Take off my shoes. And I don't know. Okay, let's just repeat it again. Another thing too, for the caregiver who's interacting with this kid, is the more agitated you are, the less information is going to get through. And therefore, the more you'll have to repeat. So, being calm, being direct, like doing calming skills. This is why I advise parents like, all right, so, Rebecca, we're just all going to everyone's going to take a color breath. Okay. And so we don't want, so my go-to example is I have a clinic where I work with kids who sexually act out. I work mainly with teenagers, but I'll get kids in preschool. And parents are very, very uncomfortable talking about private parts. So we practice it with the parent before they do it with the kid so that they don't have as much agitation. They don't have to be like cool about it, but we need them to be calm, direct, and matter of fact. Okay. Another good rule of thumb, if you reach double-digit words, you've completely lost. Okay, if they're in this stage. So just short, sweet, to the point. Okay. And this is often, as a therapist, something I help parents with, because the parents, they get themselves in trouble with language. So Billy, you're being very anxious and you're being very agitated and you're being very and Steve, okay, Steve, let's do a color breath. Let's do a color breath. Okay, 5 words. We're good. Steve got it. Now, this is where I see a lot of people talking to younger kids, and it's completely distal from where they're at developmentally. Because this is abstract. This is where most of us are. This is usually your adolescence. Now, even though with adolescents and even people in their early 20s, their frontal lobe is still kind of cookie. So you can actually have a much more nuanced conversation, but they're going to have a lot it's basically they're driving a Maserati. Okay, they have too much horsepower. They haven't learned how to control it yet. So a big part of this later stage is just teaching them how to control it. And so you can still work with them, still repeat, still be comforting. So it's never that this is done so we don't have to be present and comforting. This is done so we don't have to be direct and concrete. It's that we're going to build the base off of, so to show it visually, I'm going to use the whiteboard real quick. So to show it visually, this is egocentric. So we want to be present and comforting. Then this is concrete, and we want to be pretty direct and repetitious. And then we have our abstract. Okay, there we go. See, ACE. And then, so it's really building off of that foundation. And one of the things I see is that if this foundation is compromised, everything gets a little wonky on the later stages. This is why you see high school kids kind of decompensate because maybe they had a lot of early childhood trauma. It's also why I'm giving this talk is because I usually get kids in this range, in this stage, but I have to say, well, they really didn't get a lot of this. They grew up in a household where parents were using and cooking meth. You don't get a lot of comfort from, people who are actively high. And so even if you're working with later adolescents or working with older kids, you're still not exempt from this information because it builds off each other. I call it a wedding cake. Okay? And so you need that bottom layer of the cake because it supports everything else. The stronger these layers are, the stronger the top layers are going to be, and vice versa. The weaker the bottom layer is, the weaker everything else is going to be. So here's some common myths that I hear. Kids 5 or younger, they can't engage in any type of treatment or therapy. All we can do is behavior modification. All we can do is play therapy. There's no other modality that they'd respond to. You have to be super highly trained to work with these kids. And they're just, IQ isn't just high enough to do something like an evidence-based practice. They just don't have the IQ. And they can't do CBT because they do not have any thoughts. Okay. So I'm actually going to show you right now what CBT looks like for a very young kid who, this is a kid, I think in the video, this is a 4-year-old kid. And I'm going to show you kind of in real time what CBT looks like for a kid that age. So let me cue the video up. Where are you at, little buddy? There we are. Okay, and let's pause it. Here we go. And it's working now. All right, everybody ready? I'm going to show you what CBT looks like for a 4-year-old. Here we go. This is what it looks like.
We gotta tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. Tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. When you pee pee. We gotta poop poop. We gotta pee pee. We gotta poop poop. You gotta tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. Tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. We gotta pee pee. In the potty. Gotta poop poop. In the potty. We gotta pee pee. In the potty. Gotta poop poop. Tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. Tell mommy when you need to pee. Tell mommy when you need to poop. And then you get a prize. And then you get a prize. And then you get a prize. And then you get a prize.
Yay! Right, folks, let's get there. Now it's playing the song for some reason. All right, and first thing we can agree on is that is the most adorable kid who ever walked the planet Earth. Okay, that kid is just stinking cute. Second thing is that's what CBT looks like for a 4-year-old, right? You saw a lot of repetition. You saw nobody's using a cognitive triangle, and you don't need to. because the nice thing about working with very young kids is you can kind of plop the cognition in there, right? And because people are like, yeah, you're gonna, Daisy's gonna sing that now, right? And so yeah, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which is one of the premier models that's used with kids and adults for trauma, for depression, for anxiety. That's what it looks like for a kid who's 4, 3 or 4, 2, even 2. A lot of repetition, and you saw the parent make it completely about the kid. Like, what do you do? What do you need to do? Anyone who's sung clean up, everybody clean up. Yeah, you're doing cognitive behavior therapy is what you're doing. And so that's very simple, right? Very straightforward. It's actually much easier. It's why protocols for kids this age are usually really, really short. So for us, therapy is like 10 to 12 sessions max, and 90% of it is spent with the caregiver, teaching them how to do things like that. It's all delivered through the medium of delivery is through the caregiver. And so I wanted to kind of start us off with, well, what does it actually kind of look like in nuts and bolts? Because that's what it looks like. It's pretty clear, pretty straightforward, and that looked like a lot of fun, honestly. So my teenagers was not as much fun, but my 4 or 5-year-olds, they're adorable. And so now this is standard PTSD. This is a diagnosis usually talked about with trauma. Okay, you do not need to remember this. You might see some of these symptoms like traumatic play, like everybody's getting abused in a dollhouse. This diagnosis, for those of us who work with that 0 to 5 age range, has a lot, it just leaves a lot out, right? How do we look at, diminished activity interest or distorted thoughts, or like these seem very adult oriented. And that's because this diagnosis was created originally for war veterans and Vietnam. One diagnosis that has come up more recently is developmental trauma. And you don't necessarily need to know all of this, but if you have more interest in it, there's a lot of resources out there. National Child Traumatic Stress Network, NCTSN, has a ton of resources on developmental trauma, but it looks much more kid friendly. So one, it doesn't have to be, it can be a direct experience, but it can also be a disruption of the caregiver. It can be, neglect. It can be like the kid was in foster care the first 3 years of life. It can be emotional abuse. It can be chronic, essentially. It doesn't just have to be focal. And the key word in developmental trauma disorder is not trauma, it's developmental. So if you forget everything I say in this talk, I'm totally cool with that. That's usually a good practice for most people when I'm talking. But remember this one thing, is for kids 0 to 5, traumatic stress, trauma will come out looking like a developmental problem most times. It won't look like trauma does later in life. Often trauma later in life looks like this. It looks like a mood. It looks like, a behavior problem. It looks like, nightmares. And it's not saying that cannot, it never does happen with younger kids. It totally does. But it looks like something like they were toilet trained before, and now they're just wetting themselves all the time. Or like they are not, progressing in like their letters, like they're not using their colors, right? So we're gonna treat it like, well, is that autism? Well, no, the kid's eye contact is fine. They're not doing any like stereotypies, but it's just something weird. So, okay, so let's look at it at trauma impacting development. Okay, rather than trauma creating a set of quote psychopathology like PTSD, a cluster of psychopathology. Let's look at it like a developmental problem. And that's often very helpful for caregivers, for teachers, for child welfare, that look at the developmental aspects. And there's a couple of key ones: your emotional and physiological development, your behavioral, attentional, and your development of yourself, right? The little girl in the video probably has a pretty solid view of herself at that point, right? Egocentric. It's all me. And so now the other part of this is when we say trauma informed, I'm going to break down what that means. I don't know if anyone's read the Bruce Perry, Oprah Winfrey book, What Happened to You? It's a great book. It's actually like a conversation. And if you don't like Oprah Winfrey, then I don't know how to talk to you, because she's an American hero. Okay. Oprah's just a blessing to the world. And so what the biggest point, and they hit it in this book beautifully, is to be trauma informed, you stop asking one question, you start asking two. Here's the one question you never ask. What is wrong with you? Joy, what is wrong with you, young lady? What is wrong with you, Jolene? Don't ask that. Ask this. What happened to you? Oh my God, Maria, what have you been through? And what were you supposed to get that you didn't? Like most kids are supposed to get a dad that doesn't literally try to murder them. That didn't roll out for you, man. Most kids are supposed to get a mom who's not on oxy. It didn't happen. So I was raised like old school Roman Catholic, sense of omission, sense of commission, right? So we want to look at both presence and absences. So not just, because sometimes the problem is what, again, going back to developmental lens, it's sometimes not what they're doing, but what they're not doing, right? They're not talking. Like the kid, like that's not something the kid's doing to hurt you or themselves, because they're not talking. And Christina has a beautiful, like, yeah, exactly, Christina. What is this behavior trying to tell me? Both the presence of behavior and the absence of behavior or development, okay? So I would actually insert too, what is your development trying to tell me for our 0 to 5 kids? The behavior, I use that a lot with my tweens and teens, like what's your, because it comes out almost always behaviorally, but almost always. But with my kids, what is your development trying to tell me? Okay. There's a resource we usually use for adolescents, but it has a lot of information on race, culture, and trauma called rememberingtrauma.org. And I think it's Dr. Cassie Cassell who says it in one of the videos. She says, traumatic stress is the great imitator. And here's what she means by that. Traumatic stress is designed to look like everything but traumatic stress. It's designed to look like depression, ADHD, ODD, autism, weight problems, like academic problems, cognitive problems, headaches, stomach aches. It's designed to look like everything but what it is. So I look 18, but I'm not. And so I will often get like teachers in the region. I was in Texas forever, so often like a female teacher will tell me like, Dr. Gomez, I've been an educator for 35 years. I think a thing or two about teaching kids. And I have to, reply like, wow, you can do something wrong for 35 years. I cooked eggs wrong for like 10, and then I had an ex-girlfriend show me sunny side over, so now I do it right. I don't say that. What I say is that's how trauma works with kids. It's designed to get by a 30-year educator. It really is. So I was having this conversation with pre-pandemic. I was at a conference in the Eastern Seaboard, and one of my friends, he does pediatric HIV work. And so I was telling this idea of trauma is a great imitator, like it looks like other stuff. And he said, HIV acts a lot like that. I'm like, I'm not as familiar with HIV literature. What do you mean, man? And he says, it's photosensitive. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. He's like, oh, you take the human immunodeficiency virus, you put it on a petri dish and you expose it to light and air, it dies pretty fast. That's why spit doesn't transfer HIV. That's why, like, unless you got like open wound, that's why tears don't transfer sweat. It has to be fluid to fluid. Once it's in you, it's in you. But it's you expose it to light, it dies pretty quickly. And I'm like, actually, that is trauma. You expose it to light, it starts withering pretty fast. And part of my motivation for giving this specific talk is the earlier you can do that, the faster it withers. And so I still work with teens, but the withering takes like a year or more. With my 0 to 5, it takes a couple months, like 2 to 3 months. It's just faster, withering, better prognosis, and we can get them back on track. And so not that it's ever over. Like, I still think if you catch a kid at 17, you still got them early, better 17 than 47. But, our 0 to 5, the quicker we can intervene, the quicker they can recover. And so, so this is my definition of trauma-informed care. Again, if you read Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's book, you got a master course in it. So, but the rememberingtrauma.org is another great resource. So not just for 0 to 5, but here's basically the common themes across all evidence-based trauma treatments. First, we want to assess. We want to assess like the development, like how is this kid doing? So that's why usually if I have a 2 or 3-year-old come in and they say, well, they experienced trauma, I'm like, get them to their pediatrician as fast as you can. And they're like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I just want to make sure that they do like a Denver screening, which is a screening for developmental milestones. I just want to make sure that we get a good eye look, a nurse or a physician looks. Then we educate. There's some kid-friendly resources. We have storybooks for this. Anyone who's ever read Terrible Thing Happened or Healing Days by Susan Faber Strass. These are some very kid-friendly books. If anyone it works with foster kids or has foster kids, Maybe Days is the one I use all the time. It's written by one of our TFCBT trainers, Jen Mogaki, and it's about all the maybes a foster kid gets. Like, will I get to stay at this house? Maybe. So the books are Terrible Thing Happened. Another one is Healing Days, Susan Faber, Faber, Strass, Strass. And then the one I'm like, the one I'm mentioning specifically for foster kids is maybe days. And if you type those in Amazon, you should get all the hits. And so, we want to tell them, like, can I stay at your house, Lorena? Maybe. Well, I get to stay here, Miss Christina? Maybe. and Lorena and Christina want to tell them, but they can't. They really can't. And so it goes over all of those and validates that experience for young children. Then it also talks about what everyone's job is. So the job of a therapist is to help everyone with their feelings. The job of a judge is to have the final say. Your parents' job is to get their help. And the very last thing is it goes over a kid's job, which I really love, which is a kid's job is to go to school and have birthday parties and play with puppies. And then the last sentence is, and to be the best kid you can be. There's no maybe about that. Such a beautiful book. We want to give very clear stress management techniques. We'll go over a couple in a second. Then the rec exploration of the trauma is not a given for our younger kids. And so it's not, you don't necessarily have to do that. Now the parents may have to do that. And that might be their own trauma therapy even. But it's not necessarily like we have to do it in the way that people think for abstract stage, like you have to talk through it. No, you just have to be. So second thing to remember, if you forget everything I said, which I'm okay with, is being heard, being recognized is the opposite of being traumatized. And so, and that's what, I think is very helpful to think about when working with young kids is how do we recognize their experience? And going back to egocentric, so Dana, mommy and daddy are going to keep you safe. We're right here for you. There, Dana recognized the 3-year-old. It's like, that's it. It'd be more in your behavior than in what you say. Parents are usually looking for something to say, and I'm saying, well, what are you doing? What you're doing is actually communicating a lot too. So we don't necessarily have to do that direct exploration. And if we do, it's often that's where the professional help comes in. Now, the exploring attributions goes with the direct exploration, but with the way I know if the kid's getting effective trauma therapy, whatever age, is the parent being included. Not parent, but caregiver. It doesn't have to be bio parent, because sometimes they're the most dangerous person for that kid. And actually it goes to what Monica is putting in the chat box, which is trauma is a pebble in a pond, it ripples. So and I'll get this, let's say Monica brought in her 5-year-old. I was like, so Monica, is there any support we at the agency are going to give you? I am fine, Dr. Gomez. I am fine. Fix her. Okay. And what Monica's saying is like, I have enough crap to deal with. I am barely holding it together. I'm working 2 jobs. My husband is trying to sue me because and I just don't have time for this guy. I'm just too overwhelmed. And that's a legitimate thing for Monica to say as a parent. And, because Monica's also been traumatized like that. The child was abused, but Monica had to see that as her mother. And that's her trauma. So a lot, the treatments we have often have parent impact caregiver PTSD reduction. It's not meant to be a parent PTSD treatment, but if you see just those of you who are parents, right? In full disclosure, I don't have any children to my knowledge, but the parents I work with, if their kid something's happening to them, that causes their stress to skyrocket. And if we can say like, hey, they're going to be okay, we're going to give them this medication, they'll be all right. Your stress as a parent comes down when you hear that from your physician or nurse, right? It's not that they're doing treatment for you or trying to address your stress. It's just that you're so connected to your kid that you feel their pain. So anything that doesn't include a parent for any age, but especially 0 to 5, I don't see it, and the data shows it's not really super effective if you're not integrating the caregiver, which can be foster parent, adoptive parent, grandparents, tribal elders. It can be bio parents. It can be literal big brother, big sister. It can be teachers, inpatient staff, group home parents, anything. And so, and we also want to give them kind of an idea, like how long is this going to take? And with younger kids, it's usually kind of pretty quick for most models, but not every model. So I'm going to go through three. Oh, I'm actually doing good on time. I'm shocked. It's like I'm never doing good on time. I want to go through 3 trauma treatments for 0 to 5-year-olds. There's more than 3, but I want to show you what they look like. So you kind of got a good idea, nuts and bolts, what you might actually do if a kid in this age range is traumatized. So the first thing I like to start off with, and I tell this to every caregiver that I work with, is I think it applies to Monica's caregiver she brought up, is caregiver, you're not the problem, you're the solution. I can't do this without you. It's playoffs and we need to get to the Super Bowl and Mahomes is hurting. Okay. I need to get there. So we need that. And so I'll often try to orient them because this is usually what we're dealing with a lot of times. Let's say very severe trauma, like a couple of years of neglect, something that's pretty severe. I'll usually tell parents where their problems lie. So I say, Mom, Dad, I tend to see 3 types of problems in my job. The first is strep throat. Take a pill, you're better. Some 0 to 5-year-old kids do have that. And that's what I tell them. Like, they had sexual trauma. We have very effective treatments. We can do it in a finite amount of time, probably give me 15 weeks max. I can probably do it in 10, and they'll probably be okay. I just tend not to get those kids a lot. I tend to get the kids that are system kids, chronically neglected, a lot of prenatal drug exposure. So then I go to number 2 and I say, so Ms. Smith, Mr. Smith, the other problem I see is stage 4 lymphoma. You're terminal and the best we can do is make you comfortable. I think sometimes you think your foster daughter has that problem, but she actually does not have that problem. She has a third one, she has diabetes. Now, if I've seen the second type of problem, like in terms of psychology, but I usually see it with my 17-year-olds, my 18-year-olds. Like, yeah, this kid is developing antisocial personality disorder. This kid's going to be a career criminal, and all we can do is just kind of maintain the safety of the community and of the kid. And I'm pretty direct about that. I hate having that conversation, but I think I owe them truth versus kindness in those situations. But for 0 to 5, I've never had to have that. Maybe one day I will. This is why I work with that population a lot, is because I don't have to say it's the second type of problem, because I just never seen it. It probably exists out there, but it's the third type at worst. It's diabetes. And I mindfully use diabetes as an example because in every male member of my family has diabetes, and my physician said, you're going to get diabetes because your genetics are crap. So let's make sure that you're, 60, not 40. Okay. And so yeah, for the analogy, Celicia, is a lot of parents will come in that the problem is not able to be solved. This kid is having so many symptoms. They're traumatized at 2. So obviously, if they're traumatized at 2, they're gonna be in an institution by the time they're 13, because that obviously means they got traumatized so young, right? And so I have to break down, well, that could be the problem. I consider that number 2, like stage 4 lymphoma. But what I tend to see is that at worst, they're going to have a problem that we're going to have to manage. Like, we're going to have to give you skills to manage them. So the whole point of the analogy is to emphasize that we're going to a skills-based treatment, which means that you have to, you have to participate and learn the skills. Okay. And so now the barriers I see, let's say the parents is, okay, I'm good with this. I'm good with learning something skills-based. I'm good with learning this stuff right here on this slide. We're good to go. The barriers I see is often first, they may not know how to parent. This happens with a lot of my parents who themselves grew up in the system. It's hard to learn how to parent when you were abused your whole childhood. So to me, knowledge gap is a procedural knowledge gap. It's not like who won the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay. And so, yeah, they got it, Sarah. Quick fix for strep throat. We can't do anything for stage 4, and diabetes is we can manage it with skills. One thing I talk about when I'm talking with especially teachers is I talk about this concept, and I'm going to switch screens real quick. I talk about this concept of wood versus grease fires, which is very important for young kids. Here's what I mean by wood versus grease fires. Most, let's say, teachers and parents, at best, they're taught to deal with wood-based fires. And here's what a wood-based fire looks like, behaviorally speaking. Like, Michael, please sit in your chair. I don't want to. If you don't sit in your chair, you're going to lose a sticker. Fine. Thank you for minding, Michael. I appreciate it when you listen. That's a very behavioral rhythm. It's very effective for behavioral problems. I call those wood fires. Okay, just throw some water on it. Now here's a grease fire. Ready? They look identical. Michael, sit in your chair. Michael, if you don't sit in your chair, you're gonna lose a sticker, young man. And then flip the table over, tear the classroom apart. We have to do a restraint, and that's what a grease fire looks like. It's a trauma response. It's a stress response, broadly speaking. And so when those happen, we have to give different skills. Now, for some people, they need both sets of skills. Like I don't know how to do the parenting thing. I don't know how to set a limit. I don't know how to give clear commands. And we can give you that pretty straightforward. But I also want to give them the second skill set, which are soothing skills. This is very developmentally appropriate for kids this age. I want to give you skills to be able to soothe them. The way we do that, and I'll put the slides back up in a second because I'm going to show you a separate slide. Here's how you address the wood-based fire. Michael, please sit in the chair. And Michael, 1 to 10, little, middle, big. Tell me where you're at on your feeling scale. Okay, you're at a big, Michael. So we're going to go and we're going to do some skills. Like we're going to do some of your stress management skills, whatever you've been taught by your therapist, whatever your mom went over with your therapist. So we have to soothe the grease fire. We have to that's a behavioral stress. That's not a behavioral response, that's a stress response. Now, the first question I get asked is, how do I tell a wood fire from a grease fire? And my reply is, in real life, how do you actually do that? And okay, throw some water on it. What happened? It got worse. Don't throw water on it anymore. Okay? We switch our strategy. So try the direct command, like Michael, sit in your chair. If you don't sit in your chair, you're going to lose a sticker. Little, middle, big, where you at, buddy? And then you switch. And this is ostensibly a trial and error thing sometimes, but we want to give caregivers both behavioral skills and coping skills, stress management skills, okay? The other two are, actually, Monica brought up a good one, which is a caregiver who's just completely overwhelmed. That's number 2. That can come in a couple of flavors. And then a distortion that the caregiver has about their kid. He has reactive attachment, Sarah, he's just never going to be better. I mean, there's no fixing that. Okay. Then we really need to kind of work with you about what that word means to you, and that actually your child has something we call developmental trauma disorder. Your child has traumatic stress. One thing that we're going to focus on before we end the talk is something we call caregiver affect regulation. One of the models coming out of Boston Trauma, attachment, self-regulation, and competency, which is used in part for this age range, talks about caregiver affect regulation. It's probably the central thing before you start even giving skills to the parent and the kid. And basically it means, mom, dad, you got to chill out a little bit. Okay, again, your kid's going to feed off your agitation. Those of you who are parents know that if your kid falls down and you freak out, there's 100% chance your kid's going to freak out. If your kid falls down and you don't freak out, there's like a 50% chance your kid will freak out. But that's because you're regulating your effective response as a caregiver. That's why there's a lower probability that they're going to freak out and just decompensate, because they're playing off what you're doing. It's not that you're causing it, it's that they're basically reading the room at the little kid level. So we spend a lot of our treatments are spent on really fine-tuning caregiver affect regulation. So I'm going to go into a couple of them. So PCIT, this is kind of a busy slide, I apologize. Parent-child interaction therapy is one of the only treatment models that works for caregivers who are physically abusive and or neglectful. And it doesn't work by changing the child, but it works by changing the reactivity of the caregiver. I used to be a court-appointed special advocate when I was in West Texas, and I would go to court and I would see parents who physically abuse their kids say, Your Honor, I was just disciplining the boy. And I thought, you're lying, man. You're trying to get out of jail time because you don't want to, cop to your offense. And some of them were, but I went to court enough to realize the more disturbing conclusion, which is, oh man, I think you believe that, man. I think you really think breaking your 5-year-old's nose is discipline. And so we start off with, maybe these caregivers just don't know the fundamental mechanics of how to actually do effective parenting. Because often they start in the second phase. They want to just give limits, make the kid listen. And what we got to tell them is, actually, man, you actually have to, have a relationship with this kid. And, Felicia's right, like Sarah's right, you're only going to be as regulated as the most regulated adult. And so, yes, Felicia, I think you'll have access to the recording after training. And so we start with this relational component, this attachment-based component, okay? That's where we start with. And we also have data that this works with kids who are not neurotypical. So this is a pretty robust model. We're, again, not working on like fixing autism in those young kids, but working on fixing the reactivity of the caregiver, the anxiety, the anger, whatever it is. And so what this looks like in nuts and bolts is that first phase, which we never put it second, we always put it first, is we have do skills and don't skills. We call these pride skills. And so pride skills are first labeled praise. So I can say, good job, Maria. Maria has no idea what, Maria, good job in participating in the chat box. I really appreciate it when you interact in the chat box. So that's going to increase Maria's yay, I got to, you've never gone home from work and said, you know what, I need to quit my job because I'm getting too much praise. These people are too positive over here. I can't handle all this. No one's ever said that, right? So we want to praise for kids 0 to 5 is it's like a drug. They love it. And so we capitalize off that. Now, reflecting statements, this is, there's some data in PCIT that PCIT actually has a beneficial side effect. Kids with speech disorders actually improve in their speech. Because if the kid says, I have a ball, you have a ball. I have a ball, big. You have a ball and it's big. Right? And so they're repeating it, modeling. This is what a good speech pathologist would do. The PCIT doesn't do it for the reason the speech path would, but it does it to show that I'm attentive to you, I'm present for you, I'm connecting with you. We want to imitate appropriate play. We had a kid start just start throwing stuff at mom, and mom's like, do I throw something at him and imitate? No, that's not, we imitate only appropriate behavior. We reflect only appropriate language. And then describing what they're doing, that shows that you're paying attention. And then we actually used to be called the DRIP skills, DRIP, but then we started working with moms with postpartum depression, and it looked a little off. It's like, you have a blue block, you're doing a good job with the blue block, you like playing with the blue block. It was just they were depressed, so it was we need to add some be enthusiastic just for the time we're doing session. Now, not for the whole day, but just for the time you're doing treatment, and we do 5 minutes every day of special play with something like Legos or colors, nothing like paint or a video game, nothing like that. We don't want a parent to give a command or a question or a negative comment. Okay. In part because there's a power differential. Okay. So if I said, if I was, Sarah's boss or something, and I come into Sarah and I say, hey, Sarah, how are you doing? How's the family? What are you doing this weekend? Did you get that report done? Sarah's going to start kind of getting a little anxious because there's a power differential. It seems I may be just trying to talk to Sarah, but it's are you angry with me? Do I need to do something? Am I dropping the ball here at the department? So we want to make sure that instead of trying, but again, if, me and, Jess were talking, our power differential is equivalent. There's no power dynamic. So I can ask her all those questions and they just sound like a peer asking another peer a question. Parents are not peers. Parents developmentally need to have that higher power dynamic. And some of our families, that's problematic. They don't understand why that is. Some red flags are, they're my friend, they're my buddy. No, they're not. They're your child. You need to be a parent. Sorry. You can have friends, you can have buddies, but we need you to, be in the parent role. Because when kids, especially 0 to 5, they don't have that parent role filled, the role becomes very scary for them. And so this is a way to say it, but the legitimate reply for parents who have had maybe abuse histories, maybe they grew up in the system, is I never saw a parent. I really didn't. So I'll go to the next slide, I promise. Working with a mom, she was a foster kid from age 1 to 18, aged out of the system. And I'm trying to work with her in this model with her 4-year-old. And she's having trouble doing praise. That's what we were working on for that session. So I paused the session. My co-therapist went in to just kind of play with the kid so I could talk to mom. And I was like, Mom, tell me what's going on up here. And she's like, I can't do it. And she's really frustrated that she's not able to get the praising down. And I said, why do you think that is? What's the barrier? She said, I never got it. And I said, Okay, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you. I believe you 100%. I just want to make sure I heard what you said correctly. You're telling me that in your whole 18 years of childhood, you never got praised by an adult ever. You said, yeah. And I was like, that may be the saddest thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry for your experience. Would you like to give that experience to your son? It's like, that's why I'm freaking here. But she didn't say freaking. And I was like, I can tell you, yeah, I can work with that. I was like, okay, then we can get to work. And she did great in PCIT. She did amazing. And so, yeah, she did wonderful. And so thank you, Melissa. That's a great point. Yeah. It's like, we're buddies, Melissa, we're pals. Like, we just want them to have free reign. Like, no, there's the world, when you do that, the world gets a little scary when you do that. So this is not another way to think of these CDI skills is this is a way to make the kids feel safe. Like, so sometimes that language is better. Instead of getting the kid to listen, some parents respond to that, but your parents are a lot more permissive. It's like, if you want the world to be safe for them, this is a way we show that in real time. Okay. Now, the only kind of behavioral technique we'll do is really active ignoring, okay? And active ignoring is not like, I'm ignoring you, Steve, I'm ignoring you, no, like, thank you. Yeah, Ms. Keller got it. Is like, there is now a protocol that goes up older. PCIT just published a protocol for older children that goes up to, I think, 12. And and what 10 means, Jill, is that when we do PCIT, we do 5-minute codings at the beginning of every session, and then we'll do like 30 minutes of coaching. What we want to see in 5 minutes for you to graduate from CDI phase is 10 labeled praises, 10 reflections, as long as there's that many statements, 10 descriptions, and less than 2 commands, questions, or negative comments. And that's how, so there's a, there's a, and actually, Maria, there's some information, and it's probably a library, in our library alone, that actually goes to your question, because PCIT has been applied on kids with autism, and really it does help with like caregivers who are having trouble with it. Like, they don't understand their kid. They in a way, they don't know how to communicate with their kid. One of the very smart researcher, John Weiss over at Harvard, who asked very simple questions that are very hard to answer, asked what makes parent training classes work? What separates the ones that work, that don't? I work a lot with child welfare families, and I work with those families that they should get like a punch card, because at least on their 10th child welfare investigation, they get a free sandwich, right? Because they just come in and out, right? And so what they'll usually say is like, Ms. Keller, I did my 10 weeks over at the center, give me my kit, which is a legitimate thing to tell Ms. Keller. And so she has nothing to do, because like, yeah, you did the thing, but you're probably going to be back in a month or two because you're not applying the skills. So Dr. Weiss found out that the thing that separates effective parent training from ineffective is direct practice. It's technically not evidence-based. So like, if you do love and logic, if you do SOS for parents, if you do any of those things, those have direct practice. Like, you do role plays in love and logic. You may, like, I know I've seen SOS for parent groups that have like role plays with the kid. Yeah, Melissa's right. It helps the parent going through that denial. Like, yeah, your kid is a kid. Like, it's like you're not really seeing them in this way. And so there's some data that just the CDI component alone, you may not need the next component, which is this more very behavioral. You see the algorithm. We're not going to go over this, but I want to show you what active ignoring looks like. I'm going to show you that real quick. Let me switch my screen. So, because this is a very PCIT consistent example of active ignoring. So let me go back. Here we go. Okay. All right. Let me make sure. Oh, wait, crap. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Got it now. Okay. Here we go. Active ignoring, like, this is how we do it in PCIT. I love this video. The dog is my favorite part of this video, by the way. Right. So yeah, it's no fun to have a tantrum when no one's paying attention. And so yeah, that's pretty consistent. So when we say active ignoring, that's what we mean. It's like you'll give attention once they're attending and once they're doing well. And so yeah, thanks for Karina. Yeah, the dog even was trained in active ignoring. So we think our parents can learn this too. And so again, this one, once we get here, we're kind of just cleaning up things because our big work is the CDI skills. But just like this is in your slides, I'm not going to go over this in detail. I'll just give an example. Like again, that egocentric stage, they're still having trouble with even like basic things like chaining commands. So you don't want them to do like, okay, go to your room, put your pajamas on, go brush your teeth. Like there, you lost them after the first one. Okay, you want to also like be very neutral, again, caregiver regulation. But this is actually what a timeout looks like. Every parent I've ever worked with, timeout doesn't work for me. Well, because you're not like doing it according to like the massive algorithm we have here. So we can train you for that, but often we don't need to do this. This is the full algorithm, by the way. This is what the whole thing looks like. It's Baroque. So, and usually by here, our kid is acting a little bit better. So this is likely more effective to work. Okay? Now for 0 to 5, we have something called child-parent psychotherapy. And I like it because like PCIT, it says we need to speak through the language of play. This is how very young kids 0 to 5 communicate. So basically, and CPP treats this very literally like you're learning Spanish. Like you're like, and so you're going to learn to speak play. Okay, that's what you're going to learn to speak. Okay, so I'm going to show one more video. Sorry, I keep showing videos, but and have one of the people who actually do CPP talk a little bit about what this actually looks like. Okay.
Child-parent psychotherapy, or CPP for short, is a therapy for children birth through age 5 who have experienced really scary, dangerous, or violent things such as child abuse, so physical abuse or sexual abuse, or car accidents, or even experiencing things like being in a fire or a tornado. CPP is evidence-based, meaning that there is a lot of research behind the effectiveness for using this treatment with young children and families. We know that CPP is effective because of the research that we have. So treatment is conducted on a weekly basis. So children and families are seen by a therapist for weekly sessions. As part of the treatment, families are seen together. So one child and one caregiver may be present. CPP really aims to build skills within the family and improve the relationship between the caregiver and the child, and also to help the child heal from that scary, dangerous, or violent experience they might have had. CPP is wonderfully powerful and effective when in the hands of a well-skilled therapist to be able to really help these children and families learn.
In CPP with children, it allows us to speak their language and the language of play. It helps parents to tune in, become attuned to what's going on in the present moment and what's in the room. It helps us to align with children in their point of need. And it also allows children and parents to continue to grow. It kind of restores and heals and allows children to get back to the business of being kids. One child really sticks out in my mind when it comes to CPP. It was a very young girl who had some really severe panic attacks, had difficulty when parents left the room. Through the process of CPP, she was able to use toys to just kind of convey what was going on the inside. And as she played, and the parents played beside with her, they were able to communicate in ways they weren't able to before.
We find it to be tremendously useful and helpful and healing for children to be able to speak what's been unspeakable before, or show through their play what's been unspeakable before, so that they can begin to heal and move through that traumatic experience.
Okay, So yeah, and to actually come great question and answer question box. PCIT specifically has very specific add-on protocols to make sure we're not triggering, it's not looking like neglect essentially. Christina just actually answered the question. It's like, I'm right. Like, so you can't actually just put them in a room and leave. Like, you got to be right there with them. Like, I'm right here. And when you're, when you're ready to sit on the chair, and you're very calm and we coach you through it. This is also for kids who are not in foster care, kids who are not traumatized. We do this with every kid because our concern is like, oh, the act of ignoring the timeout's going to look like, yeah, like they, like with their abuse. And so we spend a lot, or look like abuse, period. So we spend a lot of time on that. Now the reason I'm showing CPP right now is because we've had some caregivers even more concerned, and just because of the trauma history. So we're like, well, maybe we want to do something like CPP, even though this kid is 3, so they could easily do either PCIT or CPP. Let's instead do this one so that we can come at it kind of from a different angle, because their trauma history was very neglectful. They were had a kid who was locked in a dog cage, and so that we can do that. It also is really nice if the bio parent is coming in part because it has basically one thing that I really love about this is that it's for both the parent and the child. So it essentially is drawing a line in the sand for intergenerational trauma. Like, we're going to stop it here with this family. Like, this is the generation trauma stops. And I really love that, which is it's not, something that like PCIT doesn't have or other treatments don't, but CPP, at least the people I've been involved with who do CPP, that's kind of how they talk. Is like, we're going to use this to draw a line in the sand. And so, all right. And so again, solid 0 to 5, it's very easy to incorporate culture, ethnicity, diversity, because they can switch out the standard toys to be more reflective. So instead of toys that look Caucasian, they can look like, Latinx. Downside is it can be up to 50 sessions. And so that's really kind of the hard part about this, is it can be a really long runway. Okay? And so, yeah, Karen, that's a good question. And actually, Deanne, your answer is at the very bottom link below. And so, and it's like, that's where you can get more information about this. And so that's why I put that there. If you're very interested in it or about how to get it, then you can actually look there. So you guys are awesome. Dana and Jess were right. You guys are super interactive. Now, the other one, 3 to 18, this is kind of for your older, or maybe you're kind of more kids who are like 4 going on 14, is TFCBT. Now, it's a little bit at the higher end, which is why I put it last, not because it's like a bad one, but it has a ton of data. And it also, again, like your other 2 treatments, has child and parent outcomes, caregiver outcomes. It looks like this, we call it the practice acronym. So we do PRAC, trauma narration processing, and then we can do like the latter parts, like if they need to do more safety work. Caregivers are throughout this, and we're doing very gradual exposure. And so, so it can be 8 sessions, we're in, we're out. And this is what it looks like. This if you want to know nuts and bolts what trauma-focused CBT therapy looks like for kids this age, Dr. Michael Sharinga has given us the literal manual on how to use it. You can get this literally off Amazon. Now, for younger kids and kids who aren't neurotypical, it may be longer. It may be 25 sessions, but we're doing 30-minute contacts. We're not doing like a full hour session. I've had, because I'm a TFCBT trainer, I've had therapists say, I only could get 30 minutes out of my 4-year-old. And I'm like, how did you get 30 minutes out of a 4-year-old? I only got 15 out of mine. And I was hustling. That one-on-one talk therapy, you can see that's kind of the whole point of these slides, is that one-on-one talk therapy just isn't effective for these kids. We have to incorporate the caregiver. We have to put the caregiver front and center. We have to kind of arm the caregiver with these skills in this therapeutic arsenal. That's the way the most effective treatments for this age group work. They're very skills-based, very attachment-based. They're very play-based. And so some of you are probably doing a lot of this already. Just these 3 models are sequencing it in a different way and maybe adding some other things that are like, oh, that makes sense to me, like doing the CDI first rather than like behavioral stuff. That's what it's doing. Now, I'll give you the TFCBT. This is how I taught the last 3-year-old I work with about stress. So I did it visually. There's no words. So I said, You know, if your brother goes to get the bus, because his brother is also having PTSD, he thinks, huh, you know, I need to call my mom. Okay. But what your brother did was he saw the bus, he freaked out, the little alarm in his brain went off, and then so he just thought he was getting hurt again. And so, and we went over that over and over and over and over and over and over. And so, and so, yeah. And let's see. One thing I like to emphasize is what Dr. Joy Osofsky, like a very well-known person for early childhood trauma, says: kids show stress, but they also show resilience. So we don't want to discount we don't want to minimize the stress the family's going through, but I always, with every case I have, highlight, like, here's also the ways you're resilient. What I tell my therapists is, when they're working with these kids, is they survive the trauma, they'll survive the recovery, and so will you. Like, they survived a year of neglect. They can get through 10 sessions of PCIT. They'll like outside of this job, I'm a nihilist. I'm like Matthew McConaughey on True Detective season 1. I don't have faith in humans. The humans are just mean. And the only reason I actually have any faith in the human condition is the kids I work with. I'm like, why? You still want to connect with people? How, like, who are you, man? Like, why would you do that? Like, you know, people are awful. And I know, I think people are good. I'm like, oh, who is this kid? Like, they just inspire me so much, because I'm like, oh man, this 4-year-old can, you know, keep being in the world. I guess I can too, man. Now, you're not getting out of this last part, okay? Secondary trauma. I'm going to save time for questions. This part, I apologize, I go through relatively quickly. If you want a resource for what I'm about to talk about, because we may not be able to cover the entirety of it, I'm going to show you, and I'll put in the chat box, this resource from Dr. Brian Miller. This is the CSERT model. I think Caltrim may have already had a talk on this. If you got it with Dr. Miller, you got the best one. You can also see I'm debating buying a bookcase. You can see that on the side right here. It's only $48.55. So I think that's pretty good, because the original ask price is like $98. But I mean, it's a $50 bookcase, but it's not going to last forever. But, you know, I don't know if I'll be at this apartment forever. So this one is what we're going to be talking about in terms of like secondary trauma and burnout, because we're applying this a lot with caregivers, with people with lived experience. But here's a short version. You're going to have your own stress reaction. Okay. So here's my question to you. If this activity, like working with kids, like parenting kids, all this, if this is so hard, stressful, dangerous, why do you keep doing this? Why are you at this talk? I mean, why would you do that? Right? Now, you don't have to answer this on the chat. You can answer it like on a piece of paper. When I talk to providers, I'll get some of these answers like, I need the money, I need a job. Okay. And so, and I usually push back on that. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not making it rain over there at Caltrin, okay? I don't think it's Dana and Jess, Christophe Cavassier every night, big ball in the club in San Diego. Like, no. It's like, so it's not the money, because everyone on this Zoom is highly intelligent and can do something radically more lucrative than working with kids. So it's not that. Okay. And so this job, like, the reason you're doing this is probably something deeply personal, deeply important. Like, maybe some of you, it's a spiritual calling. Maybe some of you, it's just like, I really like this, I have a lot of fun working with kids. It can be anything, but it has to be something central. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's my kid. But even that, it's like, oh, Karen, I know plenty of parents that it is their kid and they don't care. So why do you care? And that question usually hits in a place that really helps buffer a lot of the burnout, a lot of the secondary trauma, just a lot of your stress response. What's that, like, Nietzsche quote? A person who has a why can endure anyhow. Yeah, that Shindaigata is like, person who has a why can endure anyhow. Okay? So this one I'll go relatively quickly, and I'm not going to get in the weeds of this. The only thing that I'm going to focus on is this. If people refer to the term secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. If not, you can Google those. They're pretty straightforward. We also heard burnout. And here's the difference between the two. Secondary trauma, we also call it vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. Those are a virus. Burnout is an immune compromise. So, for example, maybe Christina's been doing this work for like over a decade, and Christina's not burned out. And Christina may be thinking, am I like repressing? No. Christina may just have a great psychological immune system. I don't, but maybe Christina does. So even if you're doing fine, it doesn't mean like you're repressing or you're avoiding. You could just have a great psychological immune system. I think I have a normal one at best, and I think most people do. And so, but you can get hit with the virus, secondary trauma. You can get hit with the immune compromise, burnout. You can get both simultaneously. And I've had all three iterations. Like I've been burned out, I've had secondary trauma, and I've been hit with both at the exact same time. And so our starting point is you're going to get this, it's going to happen. So it's just, what do we do with it? And so let's go into kind of like what it actually looks like. It looks a lot like PTSD. Nightmares is never that kid you think of, right? You thought it was going to be like the, 5-year-old, it was the 15-year-old. Avoidance, numbing out, like, hey, Sarah, are you there? Yeah. We lost you for a second. Sarah, are you all right? Yeah, I'm 5 by 5, Michael, I'm square. Right? Numbing, shoulding all over yourself, right? I should be doing this and I should be doing that and I should do this and I shouldn't, like Melissa shoulds all over herself, right? And then if you've ever torn your life partner a new one for no reason, congrats, you had hyperarousal. Like, sweetie, do you want Chinese tonight? Why does it always have to be Chinese? Okay, Indian, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah, if you've done that, congrats, you're hyperaroused. Now, these other ones are very specific to secondary trauma and burnout, general disillusionment. So, folks, I've been doing this job for about 20 years and, kids die every year. System is more broken than it ever has been. COVID didn't help a freaking thing. We're losing. Man, Michael, that's a little heavy, man. You might want to talk to someone about that. Like, I can't talk to anybody. Like, okay, I'm leaving you alone. So that gazelle cut from the herd, that's you now. This last one, a psychiatric nurse at the first inpatient unit I worked at, described it perfectly. She said, I get my 8 hours every night, but I get home and my soul is tired and I don't know what I'm going to do. So how do we cope? I'll show you how I cope. It has to be 180 proof. Okay. Jack Daniels is the official sponsor for alcoholism in my family. We send more of the Jack Daniels kids to college than any one American family. And that's just the truth. We should get like breakaway sweatpants or something because it was like rampant throughout my entire family. And so, yeah, that's how we cope. We have a death solution to emotional pain in the Gomez family. You push that stuff deep, deep down and one day you die. And essentially the problem has been resolved at that moment in time, okay? And we call that can't take the heat way of dealing with burnout and secondary trauma. Suck it up, buttercup. Shouldn't have had a kid, didn't want to be a parent. Right? People got it tough all over. And I did the can't take the heat method for a solid decade. The first job I had in mental health was at an inpatient unit, Sunrise Canyon in West Texas. All inpatient units are named after salad dressings, right? Sunrise Canyon, Shady Acres, Pleasant Valley. I think we could roast a turkey in that one. And so it was my second month there. I had just spent an hour listening to one of the residents, a guy in his early 20s, about my age I was at the time, tell me for a solid hour the graphic details of his physical abuse history by his biological father. I am clocking out. I'm glazed over. Dissociation for our clinicians on the call is the correct term, right? And not my boss, but this was the guy, he had rank on unit. He looks at me, he's like, hey man, what's wrong with you, Gomez? And I'm like, yo man, this dude got the beat out of him, man. What do I do with that, man? I don't know what to do with this. And I'll never forget the wisdom this man gave me. He said, you think you got it tough, man? You get beat for 10 years, walk it off, be a professional. And that didn't sound weird to me. It really didn't, because I was raised by 3 Vietnam Marines. So my uncles raised me. And I could never complain. I'd be like, Theo, man, Theo, I had a hard day today, man. He's like, oh yeah, mijito? Had a hard day? I was in Vietnam, Da Nang, 69. I was like, I wasn't born in 69, Theo. Marines don't make excuses, mijito. Right? I was like, never mind. So I just just suck it up. And can't take the heat is very badly reinforced in every system we have with child trauma. Especially child welfare. You just, you can't hack it, get out. And so it didn't seem weird to me. It just seemed like, I guess this is how it is. But it took me a while to realize, oh no, we're just if you are that burned out, you're not tough, you're numb. Right? This is what happens with our kids with recurrent trauma. They've been in the system for 10 years and they seem fine talking about their trauma, but they're actually not processing the emotion. What they're doing is that their nerve endings, psychologically speaking, are completely dead. Right? That's it. So the next thing I found, which is probably the thing you probably found, is self-care. the CSERT model that we do, which was created by Dr. Brian Miller out of National Child Traumatic Stress Network, our position is if you're doing self-care and it's working, please continue. If you're not doing it, you do not have to start. If you like taking walks, take a walk. If you don't like taking walks, don't take a walk. Okay, it's neither necessary nor sufficient to address what you're going through. And there's an empirical and there's a conceptual reason for this. So when Dr. Miller was developing CSERT, what he did was he could only find one study that looked at self-care that was peer-reviewed, and it was done on medical students. And what it had was 3 groups. Group 1 was control, group 2 was the self-care group, and group 3, they literally told them this: do something. That was all the direction they got. So group 1, the control group, had no change at the end of the study. Group 3, the do something group, actually got a little better, but it wasn't statistically significant. Group 2, the self-care group, got worse. And here's why they got worse. Deanne, did you do your self-care? I didn't do my self-care. Just like I didn't do my self-care. Didn't do my follow-up, and I'm so bad. Yeah, I just gave one more checkbox to Deanne. I just gave one more checkbox to an already stressed out provider. I just made her life harder by giving her self-care. It's just another thing for her to do on her to-do list. Okay. And so now here's the conceptual reason. Okay. So let's say that, I'm working at, I don't know, Maria, if you're a therapist or not, but let's say Maria is a therapist at my agency in San Diego. Okay. And oh God, I love that. I like Catholic love Jesus. Yes, I love that. So I agree with that. And so let's say Maria is my supervisor, like my trainee, and I'm her supervisor, and she says, Michael, that 4-year-old's a little tough. Like I'm kind of not just like I'm seeing that kid, when I go to sleep, his face pops in my head. I'm really angry. I just bit my partner's head off the other day. I'm kind of freaking out here, Michael. I don't know what to do. And I say, so Maria, look, this is a very common thing we deal here with in our agency. It says nothing about you, Maria. It says everything about the stress we have here. Look, tell you what, look, it's Thursday, Dana doesn't know. I'll cover for you on Friday. Have a 3-day weekend, Maria. Go for a walk, hang out with your kid, watch a movie, do some self-care, just recharge your battery, and I'm sure you'll be fine by Monday. And I said that as a supervisor to my trainees for literally years. And it sounds enlightened compared to sucking up, Maria. Here's the problem with that. Let's say that you have a 20-year-old college sophomore at UC San Diego, and they walk into UC San Diego's psychotherapy clinic, and they tell the therapist, Miss Smith, ever since my ex raped me a couple of months ago, I haven't been sleeping. I have nightmares. His face pops in my head. I bit my roommate's head off. No reason, I just bit her head off. I'm kind of freaking out here, Miss Smith, and I don't know what to do. And the psychotherapist tells her, Janie, that's a very common reaction post-sexual assault. It says nothing about you, and it says everything about the horrific awfulness of rape. Look, tell you what, it's Thursday. I'll write you a note for tomorrow. Take class off. Have a 3-day weekend. Go for a run, hang out with your roommate, watch a movie, recharge the battery, and I'm sure you'll be fine by Monday. How's it sound now? It sounds like a licensure violation. I think in California it is. And like the CSERT is a full day training. We can do it we can do an hour talk to, but like it's a longer training. But I dragged us out in that version. The short version, I'll do the short version now, is let's go back to DSM PTSD criteria. Domains B, C, D, E, and F. Maria, my supervisee, and Janie at UC San Diego are identical people in terms of their symptoms. If we put Maria, my supervisee, and Janie under a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine and scan their brains, they would light up pretty much identically. So why is Maria treated so differently than Janie? And the technical answer is criterion A. It didn't happen to Maria, it happened to Janie. Here's the more blunt answer. Dude, it's your job. You get paid to do, no one put a gun to your head to walk into that therapy. No one have forced you to work with kids with trauma. I mean, if we're going to be honest, Bridget, I mean, you kind of did this to yourself. I mean, what were you wearing, Christina, when you worked with? It's victim blaming, is what it is. Now, it's super subtle, almost never intentional, but it's victim blame. And Bridget hit on kind of the core, more insidious victim blaming, which is this. If I'm, Bridget's supervisor and I say, hey, Bridget, you just do some self-care. And she does it and it doesn't work. and although you can tell by this point I'm very sarcastic, this next part is not sarcasm. The best case scenario for Bridget is this. Michael's an idiot. He doesn't know his job. This crap doesn't work. You know, Shandana's right, a spa day doesn't work. It's like it doesn't work. And so, yeah, that's her best case. It really is. But here's what she's more likely to do, what most of you are more likely to do, what I did. Well, Michael, you know, he's an expert in this. I mean, he seems like a good guy. I mean, he wouldn't do anything to hurt me. So the problem must be, Bridget, I'm the problem, not Michael, not self-care, not it's me. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not good enough. I suck at this. I'm awful. It becomes self-blaming. That's what it devolves into. And so we see self-care as high risk, but low reward. So now if this is a kind of a newer topic for you, like this is something newer to you, I would advise you to get the book by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsey called Trauma Stewardship. It's very straightforward. It's very functional, and it gives you some good immediate tools. Those of you who are like, this is a little bit more, you know, kind of, old hat to you, and even if it isn't, you can still go to like Dr. Miller's book, CSER, which gives you a much better articulated self. So this is trauma stewardship. You have this in your slides. A big part of this is you got to do something every day. You can't just do it on the weekends. Like, and it has to be inside your actual work activity. And then Dr. Miller's has 5 components, which are anchored by conscious oversight. And the key version of that, and this is the last thing I'll say, then I'll stop for some questions because I want to make sure we have time for that, is the one more slide and I'll stop for questions, is basically a lot of your burnout and secondary trauma is in your limbic system, whereas a lot of who you really are is actually in the front of your brain. We want you to we want to have a relationship between your limbic system and your neocortex. Okay? And so CSERT is just a way for your brain to have a relationship with itself. As Dr. Miller would say, your mind is a dangerous place. Never go there alone. So Laura Vandernoot-Lipsey, Monica, I'll put it in the chat box. And Laura is just such a blessing. So very last slide, and then I'm going to like actually end and stop talking because I'm talking way too much. But you are wonderful people. So I want to kind of give you my philosophy of therapy really quickly. And the fastest way I know how to explain it is this. So I got asked when I was in Texas, but one of the school counselors, they said, we need a first-generation doctor. I'm first-generation, by the way, in my family. If you don't go to prison, you've hit the mountaintop. So I overshot a tiny bit. And so they said, we need a first-generation doctor to talk to, a Hispanic doctor to talk to the 5th graders. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of doctor. They're like, they're freaking 5th graders. They don't know. And I was like, okay. And so I show up to the elementary school. By the way, I had to follow a firefighter. That's not cool. He had like an axe in a truck. I had like business cards, like, who wants to do therapy? Like stress ball. Like, yeah, that doesn't compare. And so I said I was a therapist. I talked about being a therapist a lot. And I asked at the very end of that, any questions? And this sharp little girl, little 10th grader, said, I got a question. I said, what's your question? She's like, what's a therapist? Freaking little Rachel Maddow, man. Like, how do you answer that for a 10-year-old, right? You can't say like, well, you have to go to undergrad and then take the GRE and go to K-CREP accredited. You can't say that kind of stuff. It's a 10-year-old. So I had nothing. And I was like, how do you explain a therapist to a 10-year-old? So here's what I pulled out of thin air. Ready? I said, okay, who here has seen the movie Dumbo? All the kids are raised like, I've seen that. We've seen Dumbo. And I looked at the 5th grade. I said, little girl, can you say it loud enough so all the class can hear it? In Dumbo, can you explain to me in Dumbo what the feather is? And so here's what she said. And so she says, well, in Dumbo, the feather is a magic feather, but Dumbo's best friend gave him, but his best friend, a liar. He didn't give him a magic feather. He didn't need the feather to fly. He just thought he needed the feather to fly, but he didn't need the feather to fly. He could fly without the feather the whole time. Therapist. That's all I am. Didn't need me, Dumbo. You could fly all the time. Maybe to get off the ground you needed me, but you didn't need me. Like, you could do it yourself, right? And that's my philosophy of therapy. It's like, I'm a feather. Like, you have the strength. It's always there. You maybe needed a feather to find it, but nope, you didn't need me. It's always been there, Dumbo. And so now I'm going to give you my most powerful therapy tool. Okay, this is the most powerful thing I've seen work across all ages, but especially like our little itty bitties. Ready? I'm going to do it, and we're going to do it right now. Here's the most powerful therapy tool I've ever seen, especially working with parents, working with young kids. Here it is. Ready? This is it. It was like 15 seconds of silence. It was killing most of you. That's it. It's not anything you do or say. It's just being. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. I don't know if anybody else is, but she has a beautiful pithy statement that says, when people are in that like crisis scenario, it's not something you say, it's a connection. People need a connection, not advice. And so I get being so hurt and broken and scared and lost that you just don't know what to do. And what I usually tell parents is, because I've heard parents say, I've lost my kid, Doc, I lost my boy, I lost my baby girl, I lost them. And my reply to that is something my grandpa used to tell me, which is, Mijito, being lost is so very, very close to being found. Like, we'll find him. I don't believe in the kid that's gone. I do believe in the kid that's lost, but not the kid that's gone. Okay? So we'll find him. Okay? We'll get to it. So wanted to end there, and we got a couple of minutes. And the resource, so like resources for teachers, if you go to National Child Traumatic Stress Network, NCTSN, they have some actually very specific 0 to 5 resources. They have a ton of them. So you can just kind of go wild there. And yeah, actually, yes, Karen, like connect before you direct. I love it. And so other questions, I'm going to hand it back to Jess and to Dana. To any other questions or things I missed. I tried to get as many as I could, so I apologize if I missed your question. It's not that I was angry at your question. I just probably didn't pay attention there. Like so, and then 0 to 3 is actually a very great organization. So Isha, thank you for bringing that one up. All right, Jess, any ones I miss?
I mean, I'm just going to speak on behalf of all of us and say how grateful we are for your time, for your incredible examples. It's obviously a complex discussion, but breaking it down the way that you have, I think makes it relatable for many. And I know it, that people are like, yes. And if only you could be with us in a room, I'm pretty sure this would be like a standing ovation. Okay, so I think you answered actually quite a few questions along the way. So we want to say thank you so much for that. And we hope to have you back. For all of those that attended today, thank you so much for your time. And we're excited to hear how you implement these strategies in your great work. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you again.